Effective Business Writing, Chapter 4. So here's a brief overview before we get to the guided lecture notes. We're going to talk about oral versus written communication, what is good writing, and the writing process. And the gist, or main idea, is that we're really focusing on attitude, strategy, and nuance here. So here are the guided lecture notes. Be sure to pull these out and take notes as you go along. Remember, everything might not be covered in the lecture itself, so you're probably going to want to look at your textbook and fill in the blanks. There are a lot of things that are very similar between oral and written communication. Now, typically oral communication is synchronous. I speak and someone else listens and they respond back. Written communication, like an email, is typically asynchronous. I write it, and even if someone reads it the next minute, they don't read it at exactly the same time that I'm writing. But both share 8 basic communication components, and both use verbals and nonverbals. So, what are the advantages of writing? Well, writing enhances memory and creates a record. It emphasizes responsibility and allows you to designate responsibility with a record. And so it has an element of gravitas. If you take the trouble to put something in writing, it usually means a little more than something said. So why should you get it in writing? You can protect yourself and your company when you do this. So while there are advantages to face-to-face meetings, you can do a lot more and receive a lot more feedback in a face-to-face meeting. Confirm those meetings and the details decided on in writing. Have a reminder of meetings themselves. Send a record after the meeting, your notes, anything you agreed upon. And remember that anytime you have a meeting, don't just agree on it verbally. For efficiency's sake, get a link, a phone number, the meeting room, and put that down so that everyone has that in writing. Make sure you summarize those verbal conversations through emails or messages that are approved of by your company. And use email and company messaging software. So remember that texts themselves often need subpoenas in order to produce them in court. And those are subpoenas of the phone company, which makes it a lot more difficult to use those if you have tried to verify details for your company via text. Try to avoid text, when you're doing anything important for your company because of this. You want to meet legal storage and open records requirements. And if you're in accounting or finance, this is particularly important. You want to retain a history of interactions. So email threads, Teams, or Slack history are very important. Make sure that if there are changes, be specific about dates and times of when something was changed, why it was changed, what it was changed to. Use simple language that anyone could read and understand to record this information and just share it. Even if everyone in the thread pretty much already knows that, just say, just for our records, I'm confirming this. That way, if the thread gets handed down, someone else will be aware of the history. You want to indicate fulfilled goals and your acknowledgement of fulfilled goals. So when you have a contract with a client and part of your goal has been met, you want to put that in writing. If there's a payment, particularly if you've paid someone else, acknowledge that in writing. That way, you have a record, it's part of that interaction, and then you can all pass that on, and if you have to go to court, it's there, it's listed. Going back, remember, they call it looping someone in. So if you have an email thread and someone is going to inherit your account, that's called you pass it down. You want continuity. You want the other person to be aware of what's gone on in the past so that they can make good decisions in the future. So you loop them in on your communications. You bring them into the conversation and you share past communications, past history. Always also send date, goals, and scope reminders. So when you have a project and you're working on it, someone needs to be the project manager and someone needs to keep up with this stuff. It helps if everyone is aware and has this as part of the record, and that's part of your responsibility. So understand the contract, understand what you're promising to do, and put that in writing. Review and correct to make phrasing more specific. So be aware that when you are speaking on behalf of the company, you really are making promises about money, about time, about value and what you're adding. So don't make promises or use language that's too broad. You don't want to make promises you can't keep, and you want to stay aligned with legal agreements. So keep those legal agreements in the thread and understand what language is touchy language words you want to be very careful when you use. So you need to have a sense of what language is important and what vocabulary is important in terms of the contract with the client and your own company and what you're promising. So good business writing, and this seems overly simplistic, but it goes along with what we just talked about, and this is from your text. Good business writing follows the rules. It's easy to read and it attracts the reader. So if you understand the context of business writing and what the rules are, it's going to be a lot easier to make sure you're doing it. Okay, go back, take a look at this. All of this information seems like so much, and then we get to this. Here's what you need to do. All right, so communication channels. This is a decision that you need to make as part of your messaging. Do you want to meet face-to-face? This can be very powerful. When you meet someone face-to-face, you can get a better sense of who they are, what they value. You can have a more rapid interaction and see opportunities. There's synchronicity when you meet face-to-face. There's liking. You can actually become a higher priority to someone if they like you and enjoy being around you. If you've made the effort to meet them in person, you become less of a presence in their email or their video chat or they're on their phone, and you become a real person, someone that they want to please. So face-to-face can be very powerful. You get that immediacy. A video meeting like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Blackboard Collaborate can have some of those aspects. You at least have the nonverbals that you have face-to-face, and those can be powerful, and you can branch off. You can listen to someone's voice and their tone and their word choice and immediately react. You have that same thing in a phone call, just with no facial expressions or gestures. You don't get to see who you're talking to, but you do get to lead the conversation off in different areas. Obviously, there are disadvantages, right? Typically, we don't record our phone calls. If you do, you're an interesting person, but be aware. Text message has immediacy. People often respond quickly to text messages, but it's not business as usual. Now, can that change in the next few years? It probably will. Do I think that you should be very careful and cautious about what you put in a text message? Yes. I do not believe at this point in time you should use them for anything regarding the contract or any record keeping. Maybe text someone, "I'm at the door, please let me in." Or, "Hey, good to see you." Don't thank them for an interview via text. Email is the business standard right now. We do a lot of our writing via email. But as mentioned before, things like Microsoft Teams, particularly with the pandemic, have taken off. Group chat like WhatsApp and Slack channels, those are also taking off. A Slack channel particularly allows you to have that same long-standing team record of interactions with meetings that you can even video, so you can go back and review old meetings. That doesn't take away from the need to have an actual meeting record or note-taking. In fact, in some ways, it's even more important because the meetings gain value from being part of that channel, but people don't want to watch the whole thing. They just want to glance at something and get the main ideas. Social media, like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, those are, public communication, right? And I would hate to work at Facebook where they actually do all of their work via Facebook. So they don't have email, they just have Facebook. It sounds challenging to me and difficult and not exactly set up for what we're trying to do. But social media itself is slowly trying to become part of work communication channels. And you want to think about the advantages and disadvantages for that. Okay. Review table 4.1 and 4.2. Those are very important, and once you've reviewed them and thought about that, come to this next situation. Your company has a water leak in the bathroom. You've been assigned to contact the landlord, so you are the person from the company who gets to manage this project. should you make a phone call? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this situation? Take a few minutes. Jot down your thoughts. How would you handle this? Okay, I want you to keep thinking about this as we go through the rest of this presentation. So part of your communication is decision making and critical thinking. So strategy is part of communication, right? You have to assess the situation and you have to form a strategy, and this is the basis for good writing, particularly good business writing. So you always gauge whether something is going to be successful or not based on your audience. So think about your primary audience, the person who's going to immediately get this message and probably need to act on it. And then think about your secondary audiences, anybody else who might read this. So in the case of a plumbing situation, let's say your landlord doesn't fix the plumbing and it actually damages your server because it's water and computers don't like water. So what happens next? The primary audience who got your initial message is the landlord. Well, who else might read it? If it creates a record, then your boss will probably want to read it if the landlord didn't fix it and see what you did and how you did it and what the interaction was all about. The insurance company is going to want to see it. It might even go to court and a judge might want to see it. So think about who might read this and what they'll think about you as an employee and about your response and your interaction. What do those audiences want? What do they believe about interactions, about business and communication, about plumbing and computers, about how quickly things should be fixed and whether you follow the standard protocols? So what are the timelines? When do these different groups need to act? And what have you done? What have you done in order to get people onto the right timeline and to get them where they need to be, to let them know what they need to know in the right time? And then what's that best channel? And are there multiple channels that you need to use? So this is the basis of good writing. Your attitude towards writing can and does influence your written products. And I want to remind you of that because many students tell me that they are not good writers. They love math. They entered business school because they are math people. And that is why they're here. That's what they want to do. Sorry, I have someone trying to message me. I can't get away from it. So be aware that you can change your attitude towards writing. You can grow, you can develop, and you can become a better writer. This does not mean you have to be Shakespeare, but you can get work done and make money. And that's good writing. If you can get work done and maintain goodwill and make money and build a good business, then your writing is doing what it needs to do. If it doesn't, you have a problem. The 10 C's were addressed earlier in one of the LinkedIn Learning certifications that you earned, and these make it very easy for you to have a vocabulary to address problems with writing. These are all words that you know, that you can evaluate, business writing for, and you know that all of these should apply to business writing, even conversational. While I typically tell people to land somewhere between conversational and formal in their business writing, you can look at someone's writing and say, hey, this should be more conversational, but you should use this business terminology. And those are specific things that you can say as feedback that allow someone to improve. Does that make sense? Because you want to improve as a writer, so now you have a specific, 10 specific things you can evaluate your own writing for, but you also are a future manager, and you need to give other people feedback that makes sense to them. So if you can tell someone, I need you to be more concise, and then give them an example in their message of how it could be better, and say, I expect to see you follow this process in future communications, that is teaching them. And that is what you have to do when you become a manager. You have to teach people to do things your way and be nice about it and maintain goodwill. I know, it sounds horrible, doesn't it? Being nice to people is so hard. It really, really is. Sorry, I shouldn't find that so funny. Okay. Quick activity. Go to one of the following websites. So pick a website, go type it in, open another window. Okay, are you looking at another website? Have you gone to one of these? Which one of the 10 C's do you notice? Okay, you should be able to go through these websites and perform an analysis. You know the 10 C's. You have 10 fingers, hopefully. If you don't, we have things to talk about. But you have 10 fingers. You can remember all of these 10 C's. If not, you can go review them. And you can assess what these websites do and don't do, and be able to talk about when and where they're effective and why. Okay, so let's talk about revising. Sometimes you're going to need to include more detail to answer obvious reader questions. So shorter is better, except when it's not. And what does that mean? The audience in the end is the ultimate judge over whether something is or is not a good communication. So is it effective for that audience? So if I were to tell you the paper is due next week, I can immediately also expect that I will have a question. And what is that question? What day? The paper is due Tuesday. The second sentence is a better sentence than the first sentence, okay? Why? Because it answers an immediate reader question. Well, if it's due Tuesday, the next question I know you're going to ask is what time? It's due at 11, a.m. or p.m.? A.m. So suddenly we're getting better and better because we're answering questions. We're packing our sentence with essential information that will allow the reader, the audience, that primary audience, to be more successful. So let's keep going. What other questions can we anticipate that the audience will have? How do you turn it in? Oh, it's turned in by upload. What is it? It's the analysis paper, paper number 2. So it's the second paper, it's the one about analysis. Oh my goodness, we're answering more questions. Yes, the sentence is getting longer, but everything in that sentence is important. And it answers questions and it allows the student to be more successful. So now we've divided this into 2 thoughts, right? Every sentence should be a complete thought. The analysis paper, paper number 2, is due at 11 a.m. Tuesday. Upload to the Turnitin Dropbox on e-learning. So now we know where it needs to be. And we've answered those questions, but we've also kept our sentences short, right? Because the longer the sentence is, the more likely it is to be misinterpreted. Now, here's a response to a response to that previous conversation. So a further part of the conversation, and this is from a student to me. Consider the audience and the tone. So if I'm receiving this, I will read this and I get a message. In this case, probably via text. A student would text me and say, "I turned in my paper, but it didn't go." As you can imagine, I immediately have a question. What are you talking about? I uploaded my analysis paper, paper number 2, but it didn't go. All right, well, that's better. I know what assignment we're talking about now. Particularly if I teach multiple classes, this is important, right? I uploaded my analysis paper, paper number 2, on Tuesday, but it didn't go. Okay, thank goodness now we have a time period. I uploaded my analysis paper, paper number 2, on Tuesday. The upload failed 3 times. All right, I like you more now than I did in the previous sentence. Why? Because it actually looks like you tried. Thank you for telling me how many times you tried. Hooray! Now I understand a little better. Now, reader orientation. I love a reader orientation because your reader sometimes they aren't in your brain. And even though you think that someone else is going to immediately recognize you, save them that effort and explain who you are, okay? I'm in your BCom Tuesday 11 a.m. class. I uploaded my analysis paper number 2, it should say paper number 2, on Tuesday at 9 a.m. The upload failed 3 times. All right, so that's a little better. Now we have, I am in your BCom Tuesday 11 a.m. class. I attempted to upload my analysis paper, paper number 2, on Tuesday at 9 a.m. The upload failed 3 times. I love the attempted because it didn't actually upload, so it is more specific and more accurate. Better sentence. So here we have something that really works on tone. Here's the reader orientation. I'm in your BCom Tuesday 11 a.m. class. I attempted to upload my analysis paper, paper number 2, on Tuesday at 9 a.m. The upload failed 3 times. The final draft is attached. Oh, be still my beating heart. Would you like me to try to upload again? Okay. I can come by during office hours on Wednesday too. So this is longer, but it is better. Do you understand? So longer is not always worse. It's only worse if it doesn't contain information that is appropriate or important to the audience or other audiences who might read the exchange. So this preserves tone. You seem friendly, and you're doing that critical thing that I tell students. You don't want to bring a boss, any boss, problems. You want to bring that boss solutions. So if there is a problem, investigate solutions and then come to the boss with multiple solutions and ask that boss what they want you to do. This is going to help move the situation forward. It shows that you're proactive, that you're actually trying, and that you're engaged. It's going to take the stress away because you're not putting the impetus on the professor to solve your problems. You're willing to solve it. You just want to meet their requirements. So they're going to like you better. All right? Your boss is going to like you better when you have this tone and you approach the situation this way. Okay, so we've talked about several things as far as when something works and why it works. And these are practical applications of tone and information in these revisions. So how do you make something better? Well, we've made 2 sentences, 2 messages better. So let's do a quick self-assessment. What should you know after this presentation? You should be able to identify the strategic value of written and oral communication. So we've looked at some advantages and disadvantages, and we're going to continue to do so because this is critical. If you get into a job and you send the wrong type of message or you don't follow up with a summary that pertains to the contract after a face-to-face meeting, that could be your career. I mean, that could be a defining moment, and maybe not a good one. So it is important. We want you to utilize the 10 C's because those 10 C's are easy to remember and they give you a vocabulary for assessing how good a business communication is, explaining why it is good and where it could improve. So you actually have language you can easily use to talk to other people about their language. And since you're future managers, this is something you want to be able to do easily. And we want you to be able to determine and use specific styles of writing. So we're going to talk about the different styles in a few minutes. And what should you be able to do with all of this? You should, at this point, be able to write an email that effectively describes a chain of events. So you can lead an audience through step by step what has happened, why it has happened, and what should happen next. You should be able to give credit to others for their words and ideas. We've discussed this some already, but be aware that in a business, you always want to treat other people with respect, treat their information and their ideas with respect, and and make that part of who you are. And be able to assess strategic choices in others' writing. So why did they choose that word? Where are the problems in their decision making? And be able to identify them and talk about them specifically and calmly, analytically. So this is one thing that I saw on the internet recently. And I want you to remember, try to have one idea per sentence. So if you look at this is one sentence. Now, I made up the last name. The Dear School Board and the rest of it is actually from a discussion board on the internet. And as you can tell, I could break this up, and there are lots of ideas here. And then remember, even if you sit down and write all of this, you want to think about that audience and the school board and what your main idea is. So as I looked at this sentence, basically it seemed to me like the second bullet point on the left, that the children did great in both settings, was important. That special education functioned better in the public school, that the children loved being around their peers. And the second bullet on the right, yes, homeschooling can be done. All right, so those are her main ideas. Was this effectively Communicated? No. One, I'm glad she's a proud mother, but one long sentence that includes all of this makes me doubt whether she was the best writing instructor in her homeschooling environment. So I know I'm a bad person. So you want to have one idea, and even if you write a lot, and I've had students say, well, I worked on this for an hour. Well, that doesn't matter. If it fails and fails to communicate with your audience, it still fails. I don't care whether you spend an hour on it or 10 hours. If it doesn't do the job, it's not good writing. So the effect or outcome is critically important. And remember that you are going to want to be very careful about the differences between internal and external communication. So if I send a message inside my organization to a colleague, that's going to be different than an email that might go to my client directly or to my colleague and then on to a client. So remember, primary and secondary audiences. So internal and external communications are things you want to be very aware of when you evaluate, and use that terminology, because that's the terminology people in the industries use. They talk about external communications and internal communications. This is what they mean. So let's look at the 3 styles of writing, all of which you should be able to use, and you do use. This is sometimes called code switching, right? When you can shift language based on audience and their reactions. And you can shift language from colloquial to colloquial. There are different styles of colloquialisms. So slang and local expressions differ, right? And you may be aware of multiple subgroups that have different slang, different expressions, different types of conversational styles. So you can switch, you can code switch there. You can code switch from colloquial to casual. Casual are those familiar everyday expressions, but they don't usually emphasize hierarchy or social rank. They're very relaxed. Formal are more professional expressions. They emphasize rules, regulations, and order. So I often tell students to aim between casual, so you still sound friendly and familiar, and so that people don't have to reach. You don't use language that is too elevated. You want to use words people understand so they can get their job done, but between casual and formal, because you want to adhere to the formal expressions of your industry and whatever contracts you're operating under. You need to understand those rules and regulations and use the correct terminology to talk about them, and understand in your industry when and where you use that terminology. So here's some examples of colloquialism. So all of these are set in the same situation. Let's assume we're starting class. So if I stand in front of you and say, hey y'all, let's get down to business with class today, that would be colloquial. So you even heard my little twang. Y'all, the vosotros form. I'm kidding. I just really believe that English should have a vosotros form. So hey y'all is more colloquial, right? I'm pulling in some slang. This is not casual, where I would say, hello everyone, let's get class started today. So that's not as formal, right? I am much more, I'm using words that everyone feels comfortable with and everyone would use. Not everybody says y'all, even if it is the vosotros form. See, my dumb jokes. I like Spanish. All right, and if you look at the students' responses, so there is a different response. In each case, the student is asking about the grade and credit if only this one student participates but the group doesn't participate. So let's look at the formal version. This marks the start of our 3rd meeting of business communication at the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. All right, so that might be my formal version, and you can tell my voice slips into formal speak here, and I sound much more official, maybe even a little more boring. My sentences get longer, right? And I sound a little more ceremonial. And then if you look at the students' responses, Dr. Smith, the group project has been partially submitted. The partial submission was due through my e-learning account. A report of team actions will show inactivity from 4 of 5 team members. Obviously, this is the person who So this person is requesting, once again, that they know how many points they get. So you can see there are differences between colloquialisms, casual language, and formal language. And you should be able to code switch between these, and even code switch for different industry buzzwords where you will get a little more industry slang and know when that's appropriate, which also becomes its own form of colloquialisms. So just be aware that's coming, and this is something that's expected of you. Recognize when you use different types of language. So take a moment. If you have some scratch paper, I want you to draw a concrete word like whale. Draw a whale or a tree. It's like Pictionary, okay? All right. And then draw an abstract word. Can you draw freedom? How's that going? It's a little harder, right? So a whale or a house or a tree are pretty easy to draw. Freedom, harmony, and solitude, a lot more difficult. So be aware that you want to think carefully about whether you're asking someone something abstract or concrete, what their previous experience is, and you want to gather the information about who they are and what your industry standards are by reading business-related documents. Don't go into business without reading about business and seeing what people in business produce, okay? That's the first rule of business. And I know that means you have to read, and many of you hate to read. I'm sorry. Suck it up. See, I'm going to pull out my colloquialisms and say them in a demeaning way that makes you feel a bit ashamed. You're going to have to read. You can do this. Open up a business section and start reading and start looking at the business documents that are produced by companies you want to work for. So let's go back to abstract versus concrete and think about where that matters and when it matters and why it matters. Abstract is that intangible concept. It is the toy, where if we're at Mattel and we're talking about toys, that might actually become much more important in terms of the business terminology and even the jargon and buzzwords that you'll hear at Mattel, versus the actual concrete details about the names of the toys themselves. So if I talk about Malibu Barbie, that is a specific Barbie, right? Barbie remains more abstract than Malibu Barbie or Mermaid Barbie. And yet, if I am breaking this apart as someone in marketing, it is very important for me to know whether Mermaid Barbie is outselling Malibu Barbie, right? So that ability to change your terminology and to know when to be specific and why that matters, and to look at the different compartments that people organize their ideas and thoughts and analyses in. That's critical. And that's something that big picture, small picture change is something you're going to need to become comfortable with. So just like you code switch in your language itself, paying attention to the language helps you code switch in terms of the Venn diagrams in your mind that allow you to group information and determine what's important and why it's important, and to think about that in its significance in terms of the bottom line for the company and what's motivating the managers and employees around you. So why they care? Well, they care because they have to decide whether to produce and ship more Mermaid Barbies than Malibu Barbies. Or they're looking at the entire toy or plastic toy division, which may be produced in a particular part of the world, and they're making supply chain decisions, right? So there are all these different boxes and Venn diagrams that operate among these people out there, and your language plays a huge role in this. Now, here we come to the biggest problem. Bypassing is when individuals think that they understand each other, but they have different understandings of meaning, or they have different definitions for the same word or phrase, right? So you can see, if we're talking about the different types of Barbies, how if I work at Mattel, my definition for plastic toy might be tied to my suppliers and my supply chain in a particularly important way. And someone who just walks in who doesn't understand that might not know why my use of that term is important and significant in our conversations. Does that make sense? Now, think about just in your life in general. If I say to my 10-year-old, we need to go soon, my version might be 10 minutes. His version apparently seems to be 3 to 5 hours. So he's not ready in 10 minutes. He's not ready in 15 minutes. He's not ready in an hour. And you may have the same problem. Now, let's say I am in a different part of the world and I say, can you get the bat? I expect them to get one thing. They might get something different. So they might grab their cricket apparel, right? Different words can mean different things. And I've seen people have blazing arguments about a topic when they both had different words for what they were talking about. And they would finally end up saying, oh, we're both talking about the same thing. You just use that word and I use this word. Well, think about how significant this becomes if you don't see each other face to face. If you're doing this via email, this is a big deal. So consider how bypassing can function and how often this becomes an issue in business communication. All right, so in review, you had, in chapters 4 and 5, you have a lot of things that you're going to need to do. And so I'm kind of giving you an overview because we'll get more into giving credit in chapter 5. But these are things I really want you to think about. Think about your reader and the 10 C's. Think about giving credit to other people and being aware of language itself. For the guided lecture notes, come back to this and make sure that not sweating the small stuff, like grammar and spelling, think about how that impacts other people's perceptions, particularly when we're looking at code switching, when we're looking at multiple audiences. What are the impressions you give? So be able to answer all this. All right, I hope that you have a great day. This is a chapter that really looks at the kind of strategy and gives you some thoughts about what's important and reminds you of what we've done in the past and how you need to key into that for what we're doing in the future. Y'all have a great day.